First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the Catholics, and I did not speak out because I was not a Catholic. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Those are the approximate words of Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller, who spent the last 8 years of his life in a Nazi concentration camp. The sentiment of this admonition will never have to be uttered by tonight's speaker. And although you may think it hyperbole to make such an association, many would argue that there is indeed an existential threat to women emerging today under the guise of inclusiveness and tolerance. Like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Riley Gaines says that women matter and has turned her life over to her convictions. When the adults, parents, coaches, NCCA leadership did not stand to protect women's sports, spaces, and safety, Riley, a 12-time All-American swimmer, at the time a college senior on her way to dental school, did just that. And did so at great personal cost, as you are all aware. Riley was attacked by a mob and actually held hostage at San Francisco State University, and amazing. It's actually amazing she was willing to come back to our state, isn't it? Yeah. A big, huge thanks, by the way, to Danny Gonzalez and his team at Executive Shield. Let's give them a hand. Danny remains low profile in his professionalism, but he's big in the hearts of all of those at Liberty Forum, because his generosity in providing security for us this evening shouldn't have to exist, but it does because of fine people like Danny. The fact that a recent college graduate needs security to express her opinions in our nation is a stain on the principles of liberty that define our nation. It is also a reflection on the promotion of lawlessness and by those who undoubtedly wish chaos and an unraveling of our institutions and strength. Riley has become an advocate on behalf of girls and women for fair and safe sports. She's been catapulted to the national stage and testified in front of Congress, been interviewed by the heaviest hitters in media, been featured in campaign advertisements, and shared the stage with political figures now. Her personal story is as an inspiring advocate for fighting for women's rights in sports serves as a reminder to all of us about the power and contagion of courage. Please join me in an inclusive and tolerant welcome to Silicon Valley, the lovely and brave Riley Gaines.
Well, let me just say, that was a lot. I was treated with a lot more inclusivity there than I was at San Francisco State. Really, I don't take a warm welcoming and an applause for granted, especially after dealing with that. And I want to echo the thanks to Danny and his team. We just met back there and they told me of an exit strategy if something were to happen. And let me tell you, that's more than what I got at San Francisco State. I was supposed to meet, and with David is in here somewhere, he's from Turning Point. Huge thank you to him too, and their chapter at San Francisco State. Their chapters across the state of California, they do really, really great work. We were supposed to meet the campus police in San Francisco at a parking garage an hour and a half before the event, where ultimately I was mobbed, but they didn't show up. And so I figured, you know, there's still an hour and a half, maybe they'll show up to the venue. And so we walk over to the venue in that hour and a half before the event. Of course, no officer introduced themselves to me. I delivered my speech. Let me reiterate, it was just my very real lived experience of competing against a male, changing in a locker room with a male, being effectively silenced, nothing even opinionated, really. Again, my lived experience. I was met with ambush. Protesters rushed into the room, hundreds of them. They flickered the lights, ultimately turning the lights off. They rushed to the front. And that's essentially where, well, actually, it is where I was held for hostage, for ransom, for over 3.5 hours. I missed my flight home. I didn't get to go home that night. In this room, the officers, they told me they couldn't be seen as anything other than an ally to this community. They couldn't effectively do their job. These protesters, they were demanding that I pay them money if I wanted to make it home to see my family safe again, in which I'm kind of offended. I think the number being suggested, granted there was hundreds of them, they each wanted $10. I'm like, I'm worth more than $10, come on guys. But really, all of that to say, I couldn't be more grateful for a welcoming crowd. I met some of you before this, amazing, really. But a little bit about me. I graduated from University of Kentucky last year, where I got my degree in human health sciences and health law. And I had every intent upon graduating into going into dental school. What I wanted to pursue was endodontics, which is root canals. I'm getting booed. But clearly, I'm not working on people's teeth. But I kind of justify this by saying I'm still getting to the root of the problem in people's mouths. That's my justification for this. And I proudly finished my career as a 12-time NCAA All-American. I'm a 5-time SEC champion. I'm the SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, meaning I have really big shoulders still. I cover that with the hair. Making me one of the fastest Americans of all time, 2-time Olympic trial qualifier, the SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year, SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. But all of that to say, I wouldn't have accomplished any of those things without the women's sporting category, and of course without Title IX. I started swimming when I was 4 years old. I graduated college when I was 22, so this means I dedicated 18 years of my life to my sport. 8 years old, that's when I started swimming year-round. This means in 2nd grade, you're swimming 2 hours every single day, and it only gets worse from there. I guess I should say harder. It only gets harder from there, because by the time you're in middle school and high school, you're practicing 2 hours before school, you go to school, straight from school, you go back to practice. From practice, you go home, you eat your dinner, you do your homework, you ice your shoulders, you go to bed, you wake up, you do it all again the next day. But we were willing to. We knew that's what we had to do if we wanted to compete at the highest level. You don't get to have sleepovers with your friends on Friday night because you have practice at 6 a.m. on Saturday. You don't get to go to prom. You don't get to go on vacation with your family. God forbid we take one day off. The amount of dedication and social sacrifices and time, I'm sure there's a lot of parents out here who know what this looks like from your end, waking up at 5 a.m. I know my mom was really happy when I turned 16 and when I got my license and I finally got to start driving myself to the 5 a.m. practices. But this is what that looked like. My junior year of high school, I was pretty heavily recruited. To be totally frank, I really could have gone anywhere in the country that I wanted to swim. And I'm so sorry, but I'm biased, and I think the SEC is the best conference by far. My dad, he was an SEC football player. My mom, she played softball. All of my family played in the SEC. And so I knew that's what I wanted for myself. But ultimately, I really saw myself as a Florida Gator. I took my trip there, and it didn't feel like home. I was told you get this home feeling, and I didn't get that at Florida. So the coach at Kentucky, he kept pestering me, and they weren't a fantastic swimming school, and so I had no interest in going there. But my boyfriend at the time, he was a big Kentucky fan, and he's not the man I'm married to now. I'm married to a 6'4" British man who now, we're from Nashville, and so now he has this southern twang to his British accent. It's really cute. So not the man I'm married to now, but he was a big Kentucky fan, and this coach kept pestering me, and so I thought, you know, and keep in mind, this is before Kentucky basketball was losing to the Peacocks, or whoever we lost to a few years ago in the NCCA Championships. And so I thought, it'd be a pretty cool girlfriend thing to do to really take advantage of this coach, use Cole as a +1 to this basketball game. They're inviting me to a basketball game. I could bring whoever I wanted. And so I did. I fell in love with the university, and that coach who was pestering me, he's my best friend. Still to this day, we talk every single day. And I couldn't be more grateful for really the trust he had in me and the faith he had in me. I didn't even tell my parents. I went in that room with the coach and I committed, which is so like me. Didn't even tell my parents, but I couldn't have chose a better school. Outside of just the athletic achievement, the resources they poured into you as a person, your academics, your service, both things, as I mentioned previously, I'm extremely passionate about. I'm actually still the Special Olympics swim coach in Tennessee. Those things, they matter to me. And this school, they poured into that. My freshman year comes around. We had to move in the summer before. I thought I worked hard before I got to college. This was a whole new level of hard. We were practicing 6 hours every single day in the water. 3 of those hours being before 8 a.m. So we practiced from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. It's the same story. You go to class, you come back, you eat your lunch. We're swimming again. Actually, you really don't eat lunch because we practice from 1:30 to 4:30, and if you ate lunch, you'd be throwing up your lunch in the pool. So practice again from 1:30 to 4:30. We ate dinner at old people time at 4:45. We were starving. We would eat our dinner, do our homework, study, go to bed, again, wake up, do it all again the next day. And so my freshman year, I think I was essentially wrecked this entire year. I was sore for 365 days straight. It was like I never recovered. But I was improving. I had done some good things, but I knew I was capable of more. And so my sophomore year rolls around. And this is when I finally developed a sense of consistency. Outside of just the pool, within my diet, within my sleep schedule, within the weight room, there's a lot of different pieces and elements that go into this. And so I finally developed the sense of consistency. I was having good practices every single day. And I was having this breakout season. March of 2020, which is our national championships. This is the fastest meet in the world. This is the meet that you work all year for, really all of my life for. March of 2020, we were training, geared up, ready to go. 3 days before we were supposed to leave, our coaches pull us out of the water and they tell us, if you live in the dorms, pack your stuff, you have to go home tonight. And we never got to go home. We didn't get to go home for summer. We didn't get to go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving. We literally never got sent home. We had 1 week off in August each year. And so the middle of March, they were telling us to go home 3 days before our national championships. Secretly, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, we get to go home. This is so exciting. But that excitement lasted all of 24 hours before I realized what this really meant. There were no pools open. There were no gyms open. Even being from the state of Tennessee, I know you guys really didn't know what that meant. But even in Tennessee, there were no pools or no gyms open. And so I began to stress because, as I mentioned, we really never got time off. Unfortunately, we as humans, we don't have gills. It's not very natural to swim. And so I put on a wetsuit every single day and swam miles aimlessly in the lake. I had this little route where I'd jump in at the boat dock and I would swim down by Johnny Cash's house and then I would come back. And it was several thousand meters and I did it every day. The amount of snakes that I swam by, the amount of dead catfish that I swam into, it was not pleasant. But again, no one forced me to do this. No one held a gun to my head and told me I had to. I knew I had to if I wanted to continue that breakout season that I was having my sophomore year. Ultimately, we were finally able to come back my junior year, and I did just that. I continued this breakout season, whereas a lot of my teammates and my competitors, they didn't have that same advantage of training in Old Hickory Lake like I did. And so I continued right on. I was voted team captain this year. As I mentioned, University of Kentucky, we were never a ranked swimming school until that year. This was our first year where University of Kentucky in school history won an SEC title. We finished top 10 in the country. This was the first year that I won an individual SEC title. And personally, individually, I finished 7th in the country, which I was proud of. I was an All-American, when you're top 8. So I was proud of this achievement. But I knew I was capable of more. And so it was right then and there, standing on the podium, holding my 7th place trophy, when I made it a goal to win a national championship my senior year, which would of course mean becoming the fastest female in my respective event. I was right on pace to do that. About midway through my senior year, which is about November of 2021, our season was weird. It's about from September-ish to March. Well, our season is all year, but the college season is September to March. And so about November of 2021, I was ranked 3rd in the country. The girl in second, who I was trailing behind just a few 100ths of a second, I knew very well. Because like in most sports, your top tier athletes, regardless of where you're competing in the country, you know of each other because we'd grown up competing against each other. At this stage, no one just pops out of nowhere, except for this person who was ranked 1st. This is, of course, the first time I became aware of a swimmer named Lia Thomas. And there was a lot of red flags. As I mentioned, I had never heard this name before. They were from University of Pennsylvania, which isn't historically a school that produces fast swimmers. They were ranked at the top in everything from the 100 freestyle, which is a sprint, and all of the freestyle events in between until the mile. And so, for those of you who don't know swimming, think about this in terms of your Olympic runners. This is like saying your best 200-meter runner is your best marathon runner. They're totally different systems. That doesn't happen, but that's what we were seeing in this person. And so I'm looking up the name Lia Thomas on this database. It's called USA Swimming, where time progression is posted. So if you looked up my name on USA Swimming, you'd see my times from when I was 8 years old on. And I'm looking up this name Lia Thomas. There's no record of this person until their senior year. Again, unbeknownst to me, this was anything other than a female at the time. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I'm talking to my coaches, I'm talking to my teammates, my family. Who is this person? And we had no idea. We hadn't seen pictures, none of that. And it didn't make sense until an article came out a few days after these nation-leading times were posted, and this article, in a blip of a sentence, as if we were really supposed to just read right over it, Lia Thomas is formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before deciding to transition to the women's team. And then the article carried on. And my coach sent me the link. And he said, you need to read this, because he knew my goals. He knew what I wanted to achieve. And I read it, and I read it again, and then I read it a 3rd time, and I couldn't, really, of course I was shocked, but really I felt this sense of relief when I read it, because it made everything make sense. And I say I felt a sense of relief, because I then looked up on that database, I looked up who Will Thomas was, because I was curious. Was this a lateral movement? Was this someone who went from ranking 1st in the country to now continuing to rank 1st in the country? Which is, of course, not what we saw. This was a mediocre man, at best, ranking 462nd in the nation the year prior when competing against the men. But that's why I say I felt a sense of relief. Because I thought the NCAA, which this is, of course, naive of me, I thought the NCAA would see it how I saw it. How my parents saw it, how my teammates saw it, how any human with a brain would probably comprehend this. But that is not how the NCAA saw it. They saw nothing wrong with this. And keep in mind, this isn't hateful. There's nothing opinionated about what we were talking about. I mean, the sheer facts on the paper in front of us. This person went from 462nd to now dominating against the women. But again, they saw nothing wrong with it. And so about 3 weeks before our national championships in March of 2022, the NCAA announced that Lia Thomas would in fact be competing against the women, and there was nothing we could do about it. And so that first day of competition, I got to personally witness and really feel the effect that this infringement had on myself and my teammates and my competitors. And I don't claim to speak for every single person, but I claim to speak for those girls who I can wholeheartedly attest to seeing the tears from the 9th and 17th place finishers who missed out on being named an All-American by 1 place. And the tears from the moms who had to watch this in the stand. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the extreme discomfort in the locker room when you turn around and there's a 6'4", 22-year-old man fully intact with and exposing male genitalia where you're simultaneously undressing. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the grumbles and the whispers, because that's what they were whispers. We're walking on eggshells. Whispers of anger and frustration from these girls who, just like myself, had worked our entire lives to get to that meet. And so that first day of competition, again, for those of you who don't know how swimming works, there's prelims in the morning. You have to qualify top 16. You come back for finals that evening, and that's where you'll achieve your overall national ranking. And so there was about 8 heats of the 500 in the morning, and this wasn't an event that I compete in. And so I'm standing on the side of the pool watching the previous heats go, the early heats. And my team, University of Kentucky, we were sat next to Virginia Tech. And this girl, she had just swam the 500. She got out of the water, and she came and stood by me, and she was out of breath, of course. And she's watching this last heat swim, where, of course, Lia Thomas is swimming, because she knew she was going to be on the cusp, right on that cusp of making top 16. I knew her. Her name is Reka. I didn't know her very well. She's from Hungary. She stayed her 5th year. We got an extra year of eligibility because of COVID, and why anyone would take it, I don't know. But she did. Actually, I asked her why she did, and she said she had a dream of becoming an All-American. She wanted to live the American dream. Again, she's from Hungary. And so we're watching this last heat together. We watch as Lia Thomas dominates, beating everyone by body lengths. She looks at the record board as the final placings come in, and she got 17th. And this is when my feelings entirely shifted. Because up until this point, I felt confused, I felt frustrated. Really, there was kind of a sense of intriguement. I was curious what this looked like. I knew it was wrong, of course, but I was curious, what is this gonna look like? But my feelings shifted entirely when she grabbed my hand. Again, I knew her, I didn't know her well. And she said, I just got beat, with tears running down her face. She said, I just got beat by someone who didn't even have to try. And I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I felt heartbreak. And really, that's the moment when you could feel the shift on the pool deck from these girls who watched this happen. And so, of course, Lia comes back that evening, swims to a national title, beating out Olympians, American record holders. These aren't scrubs. These are the fastest swimmers in the world, really. Again, by body lengths, seconds. And swimming is a sport that's measured down to the 100th of a second. So to have one person beating every girl in the country by multiple seconds, that doesn't happen. Even Thomas's time in the 500 last year would have beat everyone in the country this year by body lengths. And so that next day of competition was the 200 freestyle. Again, as I mentioned, the second day, the feeling shifted. The first day we were walking on eggshells, but the grumbles were getting louder. And so the second day was the 200 freestyle, which Thomas and I, ultimately we raced in. We both swam in the morning. We both qualified top 8. So we come back that evening. We dive in the water. We finish the race. And almost impossibly enough, we touched the wall at the exact same time. We tied. We went this... I know, it's kind of impressive I can tie with a 6'4" man. He wasn't trying. But anyways, we tied. And so I remember looking at my teammates, their jaws are on the floor because they knew how I felt about this. Looking at my parents in the stands, their jaws are on the floor like, oh no, what is Riley about to do? And we go behind the awards podium, and the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself. Typically, you're given this little trophy, you're marched out, you're named an All-American, you stand on the podium. It's a huge honor. And so we go behind the awards podium where the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself, Thomas who's towering over me, and says, great job, you guys tied, but we only have one trophy. And we're gonna give this trophy to Lia. Sorry, Riley, but you have to go home empty-handed. And I was so taken aback by this. And so I pressed back, and I said, okay, I know we tied. I know we don't account for ties in terms of the trophy, but can I ask you, why are you adamant on giving this trophy to Thomas? He didn't have a script for this. They didn't tell him what to do during a tie. Well, they told him what to do, but they didn't tell him how to address it to me. And so he stumbled on his words, and he's, oh, well, we just did this in chronological order. I said, G comes before T, and we tied. So what are you being chronological about? Please inform me. And he said, and I actually appreciate his honesty, he said, well, we actually have to give the trophy to Lia because they've made it clear Lia has to have the trophy on the podium. You can pose with this trophy, but you have to give yours back. Lia takes the trophy home, end of story. And that is the moment when I knew I was done being silent, because up until this point I was cowering. They were effective in their ways to make us be silent, and I'll get into that. But I was waiting for someone else. I didn't think it was my position to talk about this. I was waiting for a coach. I was waiting, and let me say, I met a coach in here earlier, and I couldn't be more proud to see that. To see someone who's willing to be here. He's starting a girls' flag football team that's phenomenal. Be here listening so he can go back and advocate for those girls in this state. That's huge, and so thank you for that. Because I was waiting for someone like him. I was waiting for a parent. I was waiting for someone within the NCAA. I was waiting for someone with political power. I was waiting for someone who was supposed to be protecting us to protect us. And that's not what we were seeing. And I remember the moment, I really do. I'm standing on the podium with this trophy. I know I have to get back, sharing it with this man who, again, is towering over me at 6'4". I'm a measly 5'6". There's this photo where I'm glaring at Thomas, and in that moment, it slapped me across the face that if we as women, as female athletes, if we as women weren't willing to stick up for ourselves, how could we expect someone else to stick up for us? This has to come from us. And so that's ultimately what thrusted me over the edge into taking this stance that uprooted my entire life and led to me being held hostage over here. And I know I touched on the locker room, but if I had to see it, you guys at least have to hear about it. We were not forewarned that we would be sharing a changing space. No one told us. We knew we'd be competing against Thomas, but we didn't know we'd be sharing a locker room. And I'll kind of set the scene. A swimming locker room is not a place of modesty. These suits that you put on, they're skin tight, they don't stretch. It takes about 15 minutes at least to put these suits on, to tuck and poke and prod your skin rolls, now that I'm done swimming, my fat rolls, into these suits. But 15 minutes of which you're fully exposed. But it's also a place of buzzing and chatter, because this is the one meet, especially at NCAAs, because this is the one meet each year that every team around the country, if you've qualified, you get to be at. You get to see your friends from all over. It's exciting. Lots of laughing, lots of talking. And I think we can all acknowledge that locker rooms aren't a place of comfortability, even with only the same sex in there. But growing up a swimmer, you become vulnerable, or I guess you become comfortable being vulnerable in that environment. And so I had my back turned. Again, it's loud, lots of talking, lots of laughter, and all of a sudden that locker room gets dead silent. I thought, that's weird. And I turn around, and I look up, and there's a man who's taking off his women's swimsuit and changing into his clothes, again, fully intact with and exposing male genitalia. And the only time we became aware we would be in this situation was when we were undressing next to this 6'4", 22-year-old man who was fully intact with and exposing male genitalia. And so I immediately left the locker room. I mean, it was feelings of, of course it's awkward, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable, it's belittling, it's betrayal. But really it's a feeling, not to even over-exaggerate it, it's a traumatic feeling. And it's not just traumatic because of that experience in the locker room, but it's traumatic. It was traumatic for me to know how easy it was for our officials and the people making these guidelines to dismiss our rights to privacy, and how badly they wanted to normalize it. That was what was traumatic for me. And so I immediately left this locker room, and I went up to one of the officials on the pool deck, and I said, look, I know the guidelines for the competition, which was just 12 months of HRT, hormone replacement therapy, and they didn't check levels. They trusted that Thomas had been 12 months on HRT, which 12 months is nothing. That does not mitigate male advantage. So I said, I know the guidelines of the competition, but what are the guidelines that allowed a man into our locker room? And so nonchalantly, word for word, he says, oh, well, we actually got around this by making the locker rooms unisex. I said, unisex? One, you're admitting this isn't a woman when you're admitting you had to change the rules to allow him into our space. And two, unisex? So any man could have walked into that locker room, any coach, any parent, any official, to be totally frank, any pervert who wanted to be in that locker room would have been able to. And bare minimum, we weren't even told about this arrangement. So that's what that looked like. And that's what that's continuing to look like. But there's one more piece about this meet that's particularly interesting that I think the media has done a terrible job of covering. Naturally, right? At this same meet, where we had Lia Thomas, who is, of course, male, transitioning to female, we had another trans athlete who is a female transitioning to male. Formerly Izzy, now goes by the name of Isaac, had a double mastectomy, swam only in a Speedo, and we were told we had to refer to her entirely using male pronouns, he, him. Imagine this. The final of the 100 freestyle, which this is, again, exactly what we saw. You have a man in a woman's swimsuit with a bulge, and you have a woman swimming only in a Speedo next to each other. It's the Twilight Zone, and no one was talking about it. I felt like I was missing something. But I say this, really, and I'm not even being funny, that's exactly what we saw. It is comical though, right? It's like a Babylon Bee like headline, except we're really living it. It's hard to distinguish between satire and reality. But I say this to say, if we were really basing this off gender identity, why was Izzy, now Isaac, competing with the women? And I can answer this question. It's because Isaac never, ever would be or will be able to compete against the men at that same level. Now, Izzy, Isaac, is competing with the men. She swims for Yale, is competing with the men. As a top 5 finisher in the country for women, ranks dead last every single time. The one meet I watched of Isaac's this year, the only male swimmer she beat was a male swimmer with one arm. Again, not to be comical, it's to highlight exactly what's happening and how this is only jeopardizing women. So that's what that meet looked like. After this happened again, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I think we can agree swimming is not a sport that garners media attention, but there was at this meet. This was something special. It was a distraction, ultimately, but there was left-leaning, right-leaning, everything in between, reporters on the ground, desperately baiting and hoping someone would give them a quote so they could take it back to their publishers and probably receive some raise. But no one was willing to. My inbox was full. They were finding my parents' email and emailing my parents. It was weird. And so I called my athletic director at University of Kentucky. His name's Mitch Barnhart. He's a phenomenal guy. We have a phenomenal relationship. And so I told him, Mitch, this is what happened, and this is how we feel. And when I say we, I mean all 40 of us on the women's team at University of Kentucky. I said, how do you feel if I take a public stance? And I will never forget what he said, because he said, Riley, I love you. I support you. Speak your heart, stay true to your convictions, and don't worry about painting this university in a bad light. And I thought nothing of it when he said that, because I really thought that's how any athletic director would talk to their student athlete. Oh my gosh, I was so wrong to assume that. And so I reached out to this girl, one of the many in my inbox who had reached out. Her name was Mary Margaret Olahan. She worked for the Daily Wire. And I told her about the trophy. I told her about the locker room. I told her about the silencing, and the story blew up. I think for a few reasons, one of which being sports is something that resonates with everyone. It's not boring like the economy or the environment. Everyone loves sports. And two, people saw the severity of what we were dealing with. And I think when you hear the term trans woman, you think of someone who's fully committed to transitioning. They've gone through the surgeries. They have computable testosterone levels to us as women. We were racing against a man who had grown out his hair. That's what that was. And so this Daily Wire hit very quickly turned into Fox, very quickly turned into CPAC and being pulled on stage with President Trump, and all kinds of opportunities that by no means I felt equipped for. I mean, even still, I don't feel equipped for, which was great. I was shedding light on the story. I was saying yes to everything. A podcast could reach out to me, and they could have 2 listeners, and I said yes to go on it. So I was saying yes to everything. But I pretty quickly began to feel like I was preaching to the choir. Every old man who watches Fox already agrees with me. My dad is one of those old men, so I'm allowed to say that. But how could I reach the people who don't agree with me? How could I reach the people who need to hear what I'm saying? And so I began reaching out just on my own to CNN and MSNBC and a lot of the local stations to both Nashville and Lexington. And every single one of them got back to me and said, sorry, we're not going to give you a platform to spread your hate. And this was hard for me to hear because they were reporting on the stories. They were talking about it. I just wanted to give them the perspective of someone who was on that pool deck, but they didn't want that. And so I knew media bias existed, but this was my first time in really acknowledging how they want us to be divided. They don't want unity. They're purposefully creating the division. And so I kind of continued on right-wing grifting, it's constantly called, which I don't think people realize. You don't get paid for going on Fox. It's not like I'm making money for doing that, but I guess they assume you do. But I felt like I was complaining. I was talking about it. I was saying the same thing over and over. But my dad, being a former NFL player, he always told me growing up, it's either put up or shut up. You can complain about it all you want, but unless you're willing to do something to enact change, to fix it, then it's simply just complaining. And so that's when I began, at the beginning of this, entirely out of my own dime, traveling state to state, testifying on behalf of these fairness in women's sports bills that were being put forward. And now I can proudly say that 22 states have passed some sort of fairness in women's sports bill, which is great news. California is not one of those. So that's great news, but even on top of that, I've worked alongside lawmakers to create a new bill. It's called the Women's Bill of Rights, and what this bill is, I can't even believe we need this. It's a law that defines the word woman. And so this past year, I was able to work with lawmakers in Kansas to get it passed, and my home state of Tennessee to get it passed. Oklahoma, Governor Stitt has an executive order to get it passed at the beginning of August. And I think this is really interesting, and I think this shows the contrast of the Me Too movement, right? Because Tennessee was the 36th state to pass voting rights for women, but they're the second state to define what a woman is, which is crazy. But at the federal level, we of course have Title IX. This is a federal civil rights law that is supposed to prevent discrimination on the basis of sex. We have an administration in the White House right now rewriting Title IX entirely to where it's no longer preventing discrimination on the basis of sex, it's preventing discrimination on the basis of gender identity. And so what this means, it's far broader than just sports. What this means, men can live in dorm rooms with women. Men would have full access to bathrooms, locker rooms, changing spaces on campus. Men can join sororities. Men can take academic and athletic scholarships away from women. Actually, in this new rewrite, it is sexual harassment. You're charged with sexual harassment if you misgender a trans-identifying individual. So myself, if I were to call Lia Thomas a he, which I do, then I'm guilty of sexual harassment. Not the man who's parading around our locker room, exposing the opposite genitalia. That's not sexual harassment. That's actually encouraged and celebrated. But if I call a spade, then I'm guilty of sexual harassment. It's mind-boggling. Other good things that have been done, I'm appreciating the little things along the way. FINA, which is the International Governing Body of Aquatic Sports, they have taken an approach of if you've gone through male puberty, you cannot compete with women, which is good news. It was a bold first step, but, well, don't clap yet, because under these guidelines, it's insinuating if you've transitioned by the age of 12, then you can compete with the women. So it's a bold first step in prioritizing fairness, but by no means is that satisfactory. To even leave that up for interpretation, actually it says it in the guidelines, is perverse, to say the least. I know I talked very quickly about the silence, but I want to get into that because it's a lot bigger than just women's sports. It really is freedom of speech and how that's being infringed upon. I had to go to media training before I competed at NCAAs where they taught us how to use the correct pronouns. And by correct pronouns, I mean incorrect pronouns. Because they taught me how to say she and her when referring to Lia Thomas. Something you learn in second grade, how to use pronouns, actually far before then. Mind-blowing. Lia Thomas's teammates, who dealt with this every single day the entire season, they were forced every single week to go to mandatory LGBTQ education meetings to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Lia Thomas. When they sent an email to their administration, 16 of these girls and their parents sent an email to their administration expressing their discomfort in the locker room. And I swear I have a screenshot of the response. Their administration responded back with, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here are some counseling resources that you should seek. They were told you cannot take a stance because your school has already taken your stance for you. They were told that you will never get a job. You will never get into grad school. You will lose all of your friends. You'll lose your scholarship and your playing time if you happen to speak out. They told these girls that if you do speak out, and any harm whatsoever comes towards Thomas's way, then you are solely responsible. And you're responsible for potential death. That is what they told these girls. That they would be responsible for a potential death if they chose to oppose Thomas's participation in our sports and in our locker rooms. No one wants, newsflash, no one wants to be responsible for a potential death, but that is the emotional blackmail that they used and that universities continue to use. And let me tell you, it was effective for me. When they told me I would never get into grad school, that's what I had worked my entire college career for, is to get into dental school. I had scored in the top percentile of the DAT, which is the dental admissions test. And let me tell you, this is a 5-hour test of chemistry, organic chemistry, biology, biochemistry. And I scored in the top percentile, and they told me I wouldn't get into grad school if I spoke out. So it was effective. That is what the silencing looks like. But it's not just the athletes who are silenced. It is the coaches. It is the athletic directors. After our national championships, I got an email from my university alerting me that they nominated me for NCAA Woman of the Year, which is the most prestigious honor for collegiate female athletes because it doesn't only encompass your athletic achievement. Again, I was the SEC record holder. I had done some amazing things athletically, but also your academics. 4.0, SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year, but also your service, which again, I was also the SEC Community Service Leader of the Year, and so I was awarded many scholarships and different things for things outside of just athletics. And so when I got this nomination, this was by far my most favorite achievement in all of my college experience, all my career experience. At University of Kentucky, we had the #1 WNBA draft pick, Ryan Howard. We have Abby Steiner, who's breaking world records in track and field. We had a national championship volleyball team and a national championship rifle team, but they chose me. And so I was so humbled by this until a full list of nominees for NCAA Woman of the Year came out. And as you can imagine, NCAA Woman of the Year was not exclusive to just women because Lia Thomas was also nominated. The University of Pennsylvania chose Lia Thomas as the most inspiring female athlete at University of Pennsylvania. And so immediately the nomination and the award was devalued and meaningless to me. But the NCAA was having a big conference where they were going to announce their winner. And so I figured I'd go to this conference. But I wouldn't go in support, of course. I created a petition where in just a matter of 2 days or so, garnered 11,000 signatures in opposition of what the NCAA was doing, and also created a legal demand letter. And this was still to this date the only time someone has been able to hand directly. I handed the NCAA this legal demand letter and told them that if they don't stop discriminating on the basis of sex, there will be legal action. And that's the furthest anyone has gotten still. But at this conference, they also had a big convention hall where companies and organizations could buy booths and pass out pamphlets or whatever else. And so I thought, what better way to get myself in front of these athletic directors and coaches than to buy a booth? And so I tried to buy a booth with my name, Riley Gaines. I'd been outspoken at this point. They denied it. And so I tried to buy a booth again. I'm like, hey, I'm trying to give you $2,000 with my name, denied it. I came up with an alias, applied, and they said, of course we'll take your $2,000. And so I got a booth inside this convention center. And I had these little bracelets made talking about Title IX, protecting women's sports, and I passed out pamphlets, and every single coach and athletic director who walked by, I shared my story. And every single one of them, every single one, thank you for what you're doing. Keep going, keep fighting. You know, this is great. In the first 60 or so, I thought this is awesome. You know, we have this support, this is huge. But then it continued. And I naturally became frustrated by this. And I began to wonder, you know, where is the discrepancy? If we're all on the same page, why are we catering to this minority? And so I began asking, that's great you say that you support this. Would you be willing to say so publicly, put your name to it? Oh, no. We can't have lawsuits. You know, I'm the breadwinner for my family. I can't. I'm sorry. Would very quickly turn and walk away, leave themselves from the conversation. Even the president of the NCAA, who's now stepped down, after the whole Lia Thomas debacle, he released a public statement, and I remember it word for word because it's so funny. He said, I unequivocally stand in my decision to allow Lia Thomas to swim with the women because it's based in evolving science. So that's what he says publicly. But privately, at the same convention, right? I see him, and I'm like, he's not getting away from me. And he looks at me and says, keep going. You know, this is awesome what you're doing. Keep going. And the irony of that, because he is the one we're fighting against. He's now stepped down, and I think a large part of this is, I want to believe maybe his moral conscience. Hopefully, I'm not going to be hopeful. I've been naive before. But he's now stepped down, and there's a new NCAA president who I've desperately tried to get a hold of, letter, email, publicly. I've called for a meeting, to which there's been no response. So it's not just the athletes who are being silenced. It's the coaches. It is the athletic directors. There's this social pressure that they don't feel like they can break. They have to adhere to this. I don't know. Actually, I do know. They're following the money is what it is. These public institutions, they need their funding. And they are willing to throw us as women under the bus. We're the collateral damage in the process. A year after all of this, a little over a year, when I was directly impacted, I only saw this as you know, this issue in women's sports. But I have been able to remove myself from the situation and really step back and see the bigger picture here. And it is so much bigger than just women's sports. It's happening in prisons. It's in Kansas, Minnesota, New Jersey, Ohio, of course in California, there have been men who are convicted of heinous things such as child pornography, kidnapping, rape, who have realized all you have to do to get into a woman's prison, which sounds awesome to a rapist, is say, I am a woman. And they're doing that. In just recent weeks in California, over 1,600 men applied to be women in the prison system. Over 1,600. And so look, this isn't to say that every trans person is a pervert. It's not to say that every person who experiences gender dysphoria is trying to take advantage of the system, but can we not acknowledge how the system we have in place people are taking advantage of? And again, with women, we are the ones who are being hurt here. Also sororities. University of Wyoming, these girls, they're Kappa Gamma, and I know nothing about sororities, but these girls who live in the sorority house, a man lives in their sorority house. He's bypassed all the rules to get into a sorority. He didn't do rush. He skipped the voting process. He was just admitted into the sorority. And he lives in this house with these girls, and he walks around unclothed and erect. It's in the lawsuit, so I feel like I can say that. And what he says to these girls, and these girls have been in contact with me, and they are in litigation, so I'm not sure entirely what I can share of it. But I will say one of the girls who's been outspoken about how she doesn't want him in their sorority, she was driving on campus, and he was driving in the car behind her. He rear-ended her car to try and silence her. And so now she feels so unsafe at the University of Wyoming that she's transferring because she really does fear for her safety. So prisons, sororities. If you look at this for what it is, the changing of the language that we use, it's in peer-review medical published journals. It's no longer woman or mother. It's birthing person, chest feeder, uterus haver, cervix owner, menstruator, bleeder. I saw in a journal the other day, again, a medical peer-reviewed published journal. They won't refer to it as female anatomy anymore. It is called a bonus hole. That is what they're calling female anatomy. Because I can't even address that. That is crazy. So in regards to the changing of the language, in regards to the silencing, in regards to the denying of objective truth, biological reality, the breakdown of faith, the breakdown of family, the breakdown of our freedoms, and there's more pieces of this, such as taking the guns. I mean, there's a lot of pieces of this that directly point to Marxism, directly. And it's textbook. It really is, it's textbook. You open any history book and see how that turns out for any civilization, and it's not pretty. Ask people from North Korea, or Germany, or Russia, or China, or Cuba, or Brazil, and they'll tell you that we are in the first part of the process, and our administration is leading us actively, step by step, down this downward spiral. It's terrifying. That should be so chilling. It is so much bigger than just women's sports. And it's unfortunate that I had to be directly impacted in the way that I did to see it. But that's why I'm doing this, because if we all wait until we're directly impacted to take a stand, we are too far gone. And really why, again, asking myself why are they trying to make us deny the most basic of truths, man and woman? We are all here from man and woman. Hate to break it to you guys, that's how we are all here. The essence of humanity they're asking us to deny, and I ask myself why. And myself being a Christian, I entirely see this as spiritual warfare. It really is. It's no longer right versus wrong or good versus bad. It is moral versus evil. And I looked that evil in the eyes when I was at San Francisco State. And it's vengeful. It's violent. It's soulless. These people are desperately looking for their identity somewhere. But as a Christian, I can tell you the only place you will find satisfaction in your identity is in Christ. A lie will never become truth. Bad never becomes good. Evil never becomes moral just because it's embraced and accepted by a small portion of society. I get told I'm brave all the time. I get told I'm courageous all the time, and it blows my mind. Again, for simply saying there are two sexes, and you can't change your sex, and that women deserve respect, I'm told I'm brave. And it boggles, I mean, I can't understand it. And so I keep thinking, why can't people just see this the way I see it? And ultimately, it was only a few weeks ago where I really could fully grasp and understand why these people are calling me brave. And I realize we're ultimately scared of different things. What the people calling me brave are scared of is the labels. And you will get called them. I do. Transphobic, homophobic, racist, white supremacist, fascist, domestic terrorist. The list goes on. It's honestly kind of an honor to be called those things at this point. Because, of course, they're not based in any sort of factual, I mean, it's just name calling, right? They're scared of this cancel culture. And while I do agree it is scary, what should be scarier to all of us is not standing firm in the truth. Because if they can make us do that, if they can, again, make us deny the essence of humanity, man versus woman, what grounds do we have to stand on? They want to control how we think. They want to control how we feel. They want to control what we say, and we're letting them. They want us to say, ultimately, 2 + 2 is 5. We're living in a George Orwell dystopian novel. And again, this idea of groupthink, that's what they want. That's scarier to me than the labels. It should be scarier to all of us. And so I guess my final message, I could talk about this forever. I could list off examples of this happening to other athletes. I mean, just this morning, I was on Fox. I know I talked about Fox, all you old men. Maybe you saw it, except it was at the 4 p.m. hour, or 4 a.m. hour. Sorry, I've been up for almost 24 hours at this point. I was on there with a young girl. She's 16 years old. She reached out to me because I'll kind of tell the story. She swims in Springfield, Illinois. She's on her swim team. It's at a local YMCA. And this girl, their whole team, every day after practice at the exact same time, a man would be in their locker room every day at the same time. And so these girls, again, under the age of 16, they felt extremely uncomfortable. And so they went to their coaches about it. His name is Alex Tutora. I feel like I should name drop him. He has a daughter, in case you're wondering. They went to their coach and said, hey, we feel really this is wrong. There's a man in our locker room. Is there anything you can do? And he reassured them, of course, I'll do something about it. But it continued to happen every single day. And so these girls met together after practice one day, and they got poster boards. And they wrote signs on these posters saying things such as, biological women only, safe sport, protect women's locker rooms. And they put these posters, they came back to the pool after hours, put these posters up in the locker room, came back the next day for practice, and their coach pulled them aside and he said, who did this? And the one girl stepped forward and she said, well, I did. I was a part of it. And he said, you're off the team immediately and you're banned from the YMCA. Banned from the YMCA for opposing a naked male in their locker room. That's just today. I could list off examples of that. Really? I promise you I could. Hundreds of them reminding you how my story is not unique. It might feel as if I've been this lone voice and this lone face fighting for this, but Alex, that coach, that's why more girls aren't speaking out. They're terrified, and they're reprimanded if they do. But I guess my final message, parents in the room, grandparents in the room, defend your daughters. And really, men, this conversation very quickly gets centered around girls and women, and understandably. And we constantly ask ourselves the question of where are the feminists, which is a very valid question. But what about the question of where are the men? What about why has this battle fallen entirely on the shoulders of young girls and women? We need men. We need strong men. We need men to uphold their biblical purpose, which is to protect and provide. We live in a society where we've deemed masculinity as toxic and bad and this undesirable trait, but we need masculinity. There's this saying, and it's hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. And it's incredibly interesting because you can see this process play out throughout history. Really, you can. And I think the last time we had strong men was during World War II. And we're in the part of the process now where weak men have created hard times. And we can only hope that these hard times garner strong men again, but we need to expedite this process. And that's why I say, men, you're not in the clear here. Parents, teach your sons masculinity. I appreciate you guys being here, willing to listen, willing to do something about it. This is the first step to doing something, is being willing to listen. And again, California needs help. So it needs you guys. Thank you very much.
Your questions are coming forward now, and I'll have a chance to look at them and jump back over to my microphone. But why don't we start with, what do you say to the people that say, well, it's just a few athletes? It's just a few athletes.
That could not be further from the truth. It really couldn't. It's happening in every sport, every level, every division, every state. It's actually, I mean, it's global. It's not even just in this country that it's happening. And I know this because I have them reaching out to me. I really do. Every single day, I have a new message, multiple new messages in my Instagram or Twitter or whatever that might be from these young girls who don't know what to do. They don't know who to talk to. They don't know how to voice their concerns and their opinions. And look, these are legitimate questions that they have. Speaking of legitimate questions, the Biden administration press secretary, I know. I won't even say her name. But the other day when she was presented with a question surrounding this, it was a reporter, and he said, you know, what about the concern of women's safety in their sports, especially physical contact sports where you have women competing against a biological male? And she responded with, oh, so you're assuming that trans people are dangerous. You're transphobic. That was her response to a legitimate question, a concern about women's safety. That is the message that they're sending. Again, the people leading this country, that's the message that they're sending to young girls and women. It's that we don't matter. Our safety, our privacy, our equal opportunities, our fairness, our dignity, our mental health, doesn't matter. What matters to them is protecting all of those things for men. And I mean, it's crazy that this is coming from the party that once embraced the feminist movement. They've undermined their fight entirely. And so I guess that was a little side note. But I know that's not true because I get the calls from these girls. I get the calls from their mothers who are in tears. I get it all the time. And it's more than just sports. Again, it's the sororities, it is the prisons, it's the shelters, it's the beauty pageants now. Oh my gosh. This man who just won in the Netherlands, he wasn't even a cute man. At least pick a cute one if you're gonna do that. Yeah, it's a lot bigger than just sports.
Yeah, Miss Netherlands, for those of you who don't know, is Mr. Netherlands and his nether regions. But anyway, Riley, would you share with us a little bit about what it was like to be in front of the congressional committee? Was that political theater? I was so struck that there was all this gooey talk from one team about sensitivity and how courageous it was. I found them incredibly insensitive to you. What was your experience?
I can't even prepare for those things anymore. I've spoken in front of Congress many times. The Senate Judiciary hearing is probably what you're referring to. And so I have been dying for an opportunity to ask some of these questions directly to these senators. And Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, of the state where this young girl, that Springfield, Illinois girl from the YMCA was just banned, right? The senator of Illinois, he's talking in his opening statement. He says, what message are we sending to our trans youth, our trans individuals? And I was finally able to say to him, Senator Durbin, what message are you sending to girls? Why are you dismissing us? And that's the way we need to frame this argument. I want to, a big part in what I do, as I mentioned, I want to make impact. And so what I'm constantly seeing at the state level, the federal level, and the way Republicans talk about these bills being put forward, they talk about fairness, which is great, but they're not effective in the way that they refer to being trans as a mental illness. And why I entirely agree, we can't talk about it that way because it's not effective. We need to be strategic here, and the way we need to frame these arguments is about, it needs to be pro-woman. It doesn't need to be anti-anything. It needs to be pro-woman. And so my advice to you guys in talking about this is centering that argument around women. What about us? And I was finally able to ask Senator Durbin this, to which he didn't have a response. He actually came back and told me there are no men dominating in the Olympics on the women's side. I was like, that's not what I asked you. I'm not entirely sure what that has to do. I was sat next to the president of the Human Rights Campaign, Kelly Robinson. She made the argument in this hearing. It was Senator Joe Kennedy of Louisiana. He's sly. He acts like he doesn't, but he knows what he's doing. And so he's talking to her, how many genders are there? Infinite, she says. And so he says to her, well, she says to him, I guess, she says, well, there's Serena Williams can beat a lot of men in tennis, and she does. And so finally, Senator Kennedy said, Riley, what about your experience? And to which I was very quickly able to shoot her entire argument down and basically real-time fact-check her, because I said, Serena and Venus Williams both lost to the 203rd ranked male tennis player in a blowout. And so if your argument is referring to that Serena Williams would beat Senator Joe Kennedy, yes. I don't think that's a surprise. Sorry, Senator Kennedy, but that's not the argument, and to assume that's what we're talking about is disingenuous. The argument that Serena and Venus Williams would never be able to compete at the same level as the top-ranked men. That is what the argument is, yet they throw things out there that are simply lies. And so to be able to real-time fact-check her and several others in that hearing, it's important because they get away with the lies. They want the sound bites, right? And so we need to find ways to kind of break up those sound bites because they're disingenuous.
I think we need to keep calling out this, I call it VOV, V-O-V, virtue signaling over virtue. And every time you see it, you should call it out. Riley, there's a alumni here from San Francisco State University who wants to apologize on behalf of them. Right? Okay, very nice. Right. And the question is, if you would loop people into how this turned out, how did you ever get out of there ultimately? Well, some people don't know. And would you share with the audience what you shared with me before about what they offered the students after you left?
Yes. Okay, so I was trapped in this room for 3.5 hours. Again, it was the most bizarre experience. I was really so confused. I'm like, what is happening and why aren't y'all doing something? To which they told me, we can't. There's a lot of hoops and hurdles we have to go through. We'll just sit here. I'm like, okay. Again, missed my flight home. I was stuck in San Francisco for a night, which was my worst nightmare. Ultimately, they were able to get the city of San Francisco Police Department, not just the mall cop campus police. And that's not to disrespect law enforcement. Those are the people who are brave. Those are the people who are putting themselves on the front line. Those are the people who are brave. But these campus police officers, they did kind of seem the equivalent of mall cops to me. And that's not to discredit mall cops. I feel bad for saying that. But these guys were not the real deal. The city of San Francisco Police Department showed up. They were much more effective in getting me out essentially 20 of them formed a diamond around me, were able to push through these protesters who stood out there the entire 3.5 hours, rushed me out to David's car, where there was no police escort. They didn't make sure I got anywhere safely. They essentially fed me to the wolves because these protesters were outside by the car. I had to sprint to the car to get in safely because they were running at me as well. And so afterwards, the next day, the Vice President of Student Affairs, her name is Dr. Jamila Moore, she sent an email out to their student body. And in this email, she doesn't condemn violence against women. She doesn't say we uphold the freedom of speech. What she says is, I applaud our brave students for handling Riley Gaines in the manner that they did. And peacefully protesting. Where have we seen that before? All of the riots, buildings burning in the background, peaceful protests. We know how deeply traumatic someone such as Riley can be. Here are some counseling resources. We want you to know you are loved. That is the response from the university. That is the direction that higher education, where you're supposed to go to consider new perspectives and have these conversations, that is the direction they are going. Again, it sounds conspiracy, right? When you hear people say, oh, it's indoctrinating, it's not education. It really is. I just came from a university. I know. I just graduated. I know that it is. I felt like in my ethics courses and the different courses I took, I felt like I had to change my opinions if I wanted a good grade. There's a story in the media right now of a young girl from University of Cincinnati who got a 0 on her paper for using the term biological woman because it reinforces cis heteronormativity. What does that word even mean? I don't even know. But they used it, and she got a 0 on her paper. And what did the university do to the teacher? They reprimanded her, but then they rescinded that. It's nothing. They've done nothing. So again, that is what the university did. It's an abomination what it means to go to college and to get these degrees.
Okay, so in my mind, I'm imagining that there's a club of girls who have been pushed out of their standing, who didn't get the scholarship, who didn't get the trophy, that there's a club forming, and I'm wondering if you have any sense of that. But from a audience member who's 15 years old, she's a CrossFit athlete, she wonders if the girls should just go to the competition and refuse to compete. Is there a boycott that is necessary to end this insanity?
For the longest time, I rejected the notion of boycotting. I thought women should not have to sacrifice. There is no compromise. We should not compete in our sports. I didn't do it when I had the chance. It was my last swim meet ever. I didn't feel like I should have to boycott just because this man is competing. But let me tell you, I've changed my mind because, and really I thought legislation would be the way to fix this. I changed my mind when this got introduced on the House floor. Representative Greg Stubbe put the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act forward, and it fell entirely on party lines. All 203, every single Democrat, every single one, voted in opposition of protecting women and girls. And every single Republican voted in favor. And this is when I realized, how can protecting women be this partisan? I didn't understand. And this isn't a bill that bans trans athletes. This is a bill that ensures everyone competes, everyone, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, race, regardless of any of that. It ensures everyone plays where is fair and where is safe. And all 203 Democrats voted in opposition of that. And that's when too many girls are going to have to be hurt. Too many girls are going to be exploited in the locker room. Too many girls are going to lose out on opportunities if we wait for legislation. And so we've seen boycotts be effective in the past in regards to different issues. And so it is a boycott that I've called for and I'm continuing to call for. And we saw that in the state of California, actually, at the high school track and field state championships where 2 boys, qualified out of the 24, I think 26 actually, out of the 26, 2 of them were boys. In the past 9 years of this state championship, there hasn't been one no-show. There were 2 girls who didn't show to that track and field state championship. And I don't know why they didn't show, but if it hasn't happened in 9 years before this, I'm at least going to believe that they didn't show because they knew they would be competing against boys, and that's right here in California.
Riley, there's a mother in the room, and this is what her question is. She says, I have a 12-year-old daughter. She plays club volleyball and swims on the swim team. This season, she has had to play against a biological boy. Should we even get on the court or in the pool, or should we refuse to participate? We may be the only ones to sit out. It's scary. I think you just said it's time to sit out.
Yes. I will say, too, in volleyball, you do have to worry about safety. There's a young girl by the name of Peyton McNabb in the state of North Carolina, which Governor Roy Cooper just vetoed this past week, the Women in Sports bill in North Carolina, to which tomorrow I'm hopeful it will pass with the Republican override, so stay on the lookout for tomorrow. But Peyton McNabb of North Carolina, she plays volleyball, high school. This happened last September, okay? Her senior year, they're competing against a team with a male on it. This male jumps up, he spikes the ball, hits her in the face. Immediately she's knocked unconscious. Still to this day, keep in mind it's July, this happened in September of last year, she's partially paralyzed on her right side. Her vision is still impaired. She has to have special accommodations for testing at school. She can't play college sports like she was going to. That was her last volleyball game she would ever play because of this. The men's net is 7.5 inches higher than the standard women's volleyball net. That right there is acknowledging male advantage, the biological differences between men and women. And so that, I think, of course, it highlights the safety aspect of it. And you know what I've been in contact with her again. She reached out to me after all this happened because she felt like she had no one to talk to about it. And so I knew this would be important in North Carolina for several different reasons. If North Carolina passes this bill, it takes the majority of ACC schools, so 9 out of 15 ACC schools will have a bill in place to where it protects them. North Carolina is especially important again because of the bathroom bill. Back in 2016, North Carolina, they faced repercussions because the NCAA, after they did this, they withdrew a tournament that was supposed to happen at North Carolina. Anyways, North Carolina was important. And so I encouraged her, Peyton, you have to testify, because if you don't testify in state legislature, they will say it's not happening here. We need your voice. And she did. And so I stood alongside her. I went to North Carolina with her, and we testified together. The boy that hit her in the face saw that she was starting to speak out. And he messaged her on Instagram, and he said, I really be living in your head rent-free, don't I? Can't you find someone else to think about? That is the manipulation. That is the entitlement. That is the narcissism that these men, it's a power trip. It really is. They get off on being in this powerful position and hurting women and exposing themselves to women. It's really, especially in regards to the locker room, it's really a sexual fetish. And yeah, I just will stop there, but I could keep going.
Riley, not to take anything away from you, but I know that many of you are in this room are thinking that Riley's parents should write a book on parenting. I love your put up or shut up, Dad. And the audience question is, can you please share some tips on how you keep your composure when hearing illogical thinking? She said, I'd like to take some tips back to the East Bay with me tonight on that.
Well, they definitely need it. It is hard. It really is. And I had to learn this because, again, this is never something I wanted. This is never something I asked for. This is never something that I have prepared for. So I've had to learn. I've had to learn how to be composed. And I think what it kind of boils back down to for me, if I were to blow up on the Human Rights Campaign president next to me who's saying the most ridiculous things and has a total of 3 functioning brain cells, if I actually said what I wanted to say, it wouldn't be effective. It just wouldn't be. I would lose credibility. I would come off as, which they will call you anyways, but it would come off as hateful, and they would have more ammo against me and my fight and what I'm fighting for. And so I have to remind myself of who I'm doing it for. And who I'm doing it for, it's not for me because I'm done competing. No one wants to see me swim again. I would probably drown now that I'm a year out. But I'm doing it for those women who came before me, who fought relentlessly for Title IX. And I'm doing it for those women who are present female athletes who are, again, effectively silenced by this. And I'm doing it, no doubt, for that next generation of female athletes who doesn't yet have a voice and who don't yet understand the implications of what this means. But this brings me to a different point of I accredit this thinking of kind of like it's like a team, right? I accredit this thinking to playing sports. Playing sports has given me, outside of athletic achievement, it's given me the leadership to do this. It's given me the confidence, the security, the resiliency to do this. And so no girl should be denied of those opportunities, of developing lifelong characteristics and skills that translate far beyond your athletic career. Those skills that I got from playing sports, it's allowed me to create this mindset and ultimately keep my composure in environments where it's really hard.
Riley, do you have the energy for a couple more questions?
Of course.
Okay. This is a woman who's been up for 24 hours, right? Okay. Do you want to address the Martina Navratilova, Megan Rapinoe, J.K. Rowling, all of that stuff that's going on publicly? And do you think there should be a special category in sports for kind of everything goes, hormones, performance-enhancing drugs, et cetera?
In regards to some of the different figures who have been outspoken on this, look, Megan Rapinoe, this is someone who prided herself on advocating for women and equal pay and equal resources and equal access, especially when it came down to the U.S. women's national soccer team compared to the men's. She prided herself on that, and while I agree with literally nothing she says, I do have to say she was a trailblazer for women in that way. She is undermining her fight entirely by advocating for male inclusion in women's sports. And notice she just announced her retirement this week, right? So it's not going to affect her, and she doesn't have a daughter to defend, so she has nothing to lose by virtue signaling, and that's what it is. She wants to be seen as inclusive. She wants to be seen as kind and welcoming, and again, tolerant, accepting, all of those terms, but it is not inclusive to allow men onto our podiums, taking our scholarships, our titles, our awards. That's exclusive to the very female athletes who the women's sporting category was created to protect and uphold and celebrate. And it is not kind to ask a young girl to undress in a locker room with a man. That's sexual, that's voyeurism, that's indecent exposure. There's a list of criminal charges there. That's not kind. Classic case of virtue signaling. And again, she's retiring. Megan Rapinoe would not have this same stance if she was still climbing the ladder to reach that point. And if you've seen her play, you know she's an aggressive player. I think she would shiv someone who tried to take her spot on that soccer field. I really do. I think she would shiv them. That is what I think. So entirely, again, disingenuous. And I actually just yesterday, I'm launching a new podcast. I swore I would never do that. I have no idea what I'm doing. But I did, and so I've publicly asked her to come on my podcast and we can talk about it, which I'll keep you guys updated if I get a response, but don't sit on the edge of your seat. Martina, she is a lifelong liberal. She, of course, is a phenom for women's tennis. And so she provides an interesting perspective, being someone who votes Democrat. She supports Biden. She hates Trump. She makes it very public. But she knows this is wrong. And so while we don't agree, again, on literally anything else, I value that she, as an elite athlete, can understand that this isn't hateful. It's not transphobic. We're not trying to control how you live, how you identify. Do what you want, but don't infringe on me and my rights. And so her perspective is interesting. What was the second part of the question? I forgot.
Do you think there should be a special category?
Okay, a special category. Look, in an ideal world, sure, right? If we had the resources, if we had enough people to play in these leagues, but in reality, we don't. And so I don't think a third category is a viable solution. I think you compete with your biological sex. That's one solution. Two, I think we keep the female category as female, and there's no compromises there. And we have the men's category turn into an open category because the fairness in sport is not jeopardized there. And so those are my proposed two solutions. I will say, every decision has consequences, even if it's something as simple as getting out of bed in the morning. If you don't do it, it has consequences. And it's the same thing with transitioning. If you want to commit to transitioning, it might mean you have to give up your sport, or it might mean you don't give up your sport, but you don't compete in the category that matches your identity. It matches your sex. And again, that just ensures everyone competes where it's fair and where it's safe. No one is being banned from sports, but decisions have consequences, and I think this is one of them. I don't know why these people think they're entitled to do whatever they want with whatever expense that looks like.
Riley, you've been called a domestic terrorist. I think she's the cutest domestic terrorist we've had, and we've had a lot of them at the Liberty Forum. But I want to wind up tonight. You've been very, very generous with your time. Your presentation was amazing. But I want to wind up tonight with a question for you. You obviously swam with snakes in Tennessee in the lakes. You know how to swim with snakes now in your fight for this. You are inspiring, but frankly, inspiration, that word doesn't mean anything unless you take what you learned tonight and you do something with it. That's our responsibility. We can't leave this fight to young girls. It's not right. It's just simply not right. So our final question always at the forum is, what would you like us to do? Give us some real, very specific tasks that we can undertake tomorrow morning on behalf of your efforts.
One, again, being in California, there are a lot of obstacles presented, right? Let's be real here, and I understand this. But reach out to your local state rep, your state senator. You as constituents, their job is to represent you. While they might not do that, that is their job, and you should remind them of that. We as your constituents, because look, this is the overwhelming majority. Even the overwhelming majority of the Democratic Party acknowledges how having men and women's sports in locker rooms is utter lunacy. Recent polls show nearly, of course, 100% of Republicans, but even 80% of independent voters, 85% of independent voters, and 70% of Democrats know this is wrong. So remind those in charge, those voting, those virtue signaling, that this is not how their constituents feel, and that this comes with repercussions in terms of how you vote next time. I wouldn't imagine any of you vote for the people not voting for this anyways, at least I would hope not. But remind them of that. Again, in regards to how we communicate this message, first of all, be bold, be empowered, be willing to have these conversations, don't shy away, but be effective in the way that we do it. Make it a pro-woman argument. What I've seen and the states I've gone to, that is how we will win this. We will win this battle, and we are on the winning side of this. And just know that it's liberating to say the truth. It really is. Once you don't have to adhere to the guidelines or the rules or any of those things anymore, and you say the truth, it feels like a weight is off of your back. And there's no going back from that point. I could give you a whole list of cancel your YMCA memberships, don't buy from Hershey's. I could give you a whole list of companies to not spend your money on because of the direction that they've gone. But I guess more than anything is don't shy away from this conversation, because that's how we got here, right? We've ignored it for too long, and now we're faced with it. And it's time to say enough is enough. Go to those school board meetings. Don't be afraid to ruffle feathers, step on toes, and again, defend your daughters and teach your sons masculinity.
So, I've been with Riley for several hours now, and the most amazing imprint is in my head. 3 words. She must have said it to me 15 times in the last 4 hours. Every time I asked her, Riley, would you mind if we step over here? We're going to do this. Kind of been directing her around to make this happen. She says, let's do it. Let's do it. So I say to you tonight, let's do it for Riley Gaines. Let's do it for the women of America. Let's do it for the United States. Let's do it for freedom. Thank you, Riley Gaines.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers, and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.